Montana Territory, 1885. The bitter frost of December gripped the small settlement of Sweetwater Creek with merciless intensity, transforming breath into ghostly plumes and hardening the earth until it cracked like brittle bones. Vincent Faulkner had always believed the frontier was no place for tenderness. Here, a man survived by the strength in his hands and the steel in his spine. Anything softer was bound to get you killed. Vincent pulled his collar higher against the wind as he rode toward the small wooden church on the edge of town. Snow had been falling steadily since noon, already several inches deep and growing deeper. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Scout, trudged forward with practiced determination, hooves crunching through the fresh powder. At 25, Vincent had the lean, weathered look of a man who spent most days in the saddle. His eyes, pale blue as a summer sky, surveyed the landscape with constant vigilance, a habit formed by years of driving cattle through territories where danger lurked behind every ridge. Though handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jawline and light stubble that never quite grew into a proper beard, the young cowboy rarely noticed the appreciative glances from the town's eligible women. He had long ago decided that attachment was a luxury he couldn't afford. As the church's simple steeple came into view through the thickening snowfall, Vincent patted Scout's neck. "Just a quick stop to pay our respects, boy. Then we'll head back to the warmths." 6 months had passed since he'd buried his uncle, the only family he'd known since age 12, in the small Churchyard cemetery. 6 months of riding solo, taking whatever honest work he could find, and refusing to admit how the solitude gnawed at him like a hungry wolf. Sweetwater Creek was supposed to be nothing more than a brief stop on his journey south toward Texas, where ranch work would be plentiful through the winter. Vincent dismounted at the church's hitching post, his boots sinking into the snow. He pulled his saddlebag open and extracted the only luxury he allowed himself, a single beeswax candle carefully wrapped in cloth. It had become his ritual whenever he passed through town, one candle for Uncle Henry, the man who'd taught him everything about surviving the unforgiving West. "Survival is what matters out here," Henry had repeated countless times. "No time for foolishness like love. Partners die, wives get sick, children starve, a man alone answers to nobody and nothing." Vincent had taken these words as gospel. Now as he crunched through the snow toward the cemetery, a strange emptiness hollowed his chest. Survival was one thing, but for what purpose? To keep surviving another day, another year. Another decade of lonesome trails and campfires with no one to share stories. He shook off these thoughts like a dog shedding water. Sentiment was dangerous. Sentiment made men weak, and out here, weakness was a death sentence. The cemetery was still and silent, the iron gate hanging slightly ajar. Vincent was about to push it open when he noticed something unusual, a figure kneeling in the snow beside one of the graves. In the fading winter light, he could make out the silhouette of a woman, her shoulders shaking from what appeared to be a combination of sobbing and shivering. Vincent hesitated. The affairs of strangers were not his concern, especially when those affairs involved grief. He considered turning back, returning another day when the cemetery would be empty. But something, perhaps the growing darkness or the intensifying snowfall, made him push the gate open instead. The hinges creaked, announcing his presence. The woman startled and turned toward the sound, revealing a face that caused Vincent to halt mid-step. She was young, perhaps 20 years old, with tear-stained cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Her hair, the color of dark walnut, escaped in wispy tendrils from beneath a woolen bonnet. Despite her obvious distress, there was a striking beauty to her features, determined chin, high cheekbones, and eyes that reminded him of summer thunderstorms, gray with flecks of darker gray. "I apologize, ma'am," Vincent said, tipping his hat. "Didn't mean to interrupt your private moment." The young woman hastily wiped her tears with gloved hands. "No need for apologies, sir. The churchyard belongs to no one person." Her voice carried a slight tremble, whether from emotion or cold, Vincent couldn't tell. He noticed she wore a dress of deep blue wool, practical but not nearly warm enough for the plummeting temperatures. No coat covered her shoulders, just a thin shawl that offered minimal protection against the elements. Night was falling fast and the temperature with it. "If you don't mind my saying, it's getting mighty cold to be out here without proper covering," Vincent observed, maintaining a respectful distance. "I know," she admitted, attempting to stand but wobbling slightly. "I lost track of time. I came to visit my father's grave before heading south tomorrow. I didn't notice how cold it had gotten until—" She trailed off, her teeth beginning to chatter audibly. "South?" Vincent couldn't help asking. "To my cousin's ranch near Denver. The stagecoach leaves at first light." She managed to stand fully now, though her arms wrapped tightly around herself in a futile attempt to generate warmth. Vincent glanced at the candle in his hand, then back at the shivering woman. He had ridden through blizzards where men twice her size had frozen to death in less time than it would take her to walk back to town. The decision formed before he fully recognized it. "Ma'am, I've got a spare coat on my horse and this candle here," he said, extending the carefully wrapped beeswax candle toward her. "If you permit me, I'd be honored to escort you back to town before this snow gets any worse." She looked at him with surprise, then suspicion. "That's very kind, but I couldn't take your candle." "Clearly you brought it for someone special." "Uncle Henry would understand," Vincent replied, surprised by his own certainty. He never was one to let a lady freeze on account of ceremony. Her expression softened. "My name is Katherine Calloway, Kate to most folks." "Vincent Faulkner," he responded, moving closer to help her. "Most call me Vince." "Well, Mr. Faulkner, I accept your kindness with gratitude," she said, her voice steadier now despite the cold. "But only if you'll let me repay you with a hot meal at the boarding house where I'm staying. Mrs. Peterson makes an excellent stew." Something about her directness caught Vincent off guard. Women in frontier towns rarely invited male strangers to dinner, especially young, unmarried women. But there was nothing flirtatious in her manner, just practical gratitude and perhaps a recognition that they were two souls alone in a town where neither belonged. "That's not necessary, Miss Calloway," he began. "Kate," she corrected him. "Kate," he amended, "and truly the candle is a small thing." "Nevertheless, I insist," she said with surprising firmness for someone whose lips were turning slightly blue. "Besides, from the look of you, you could use a proper meal yourself." Before Vincent could respond, Kate swayed slightly, her exhaustion and the cold clearly taking their toll. Without thinking, he stepped forward and caught her elbow to steady her. The moment his gloved hand touched her arm, something shifted in the air between them, not romantic, nothing so simple. Rather, it was the sudden, startling recognition that they were no longer strangers but two people connected, however temporarily, by circumstance and mutual need. "Let's get you warmed up," Vincent said quietly, surprising himself with the gentle tone that had replaced his usual gruffness. He led her toward Scout, where he retrieved his spare coat from his bedroll, a heavy wool garment lined with sheepskin. "This might be a bit large, but it'll keep the worst of the cold away." Kate accepted the coat with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Faulkner." "Vince," he corrected, echoing her earlier response. A small smile touched her lips as she wrapped herself in his coat, which indeed swallowed her slender frame. "Vince." The snow fell more heavily now, the wind driving icy flakes sideways with growing force. Vincent helped Kate onto Scout, then mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance despite the necessity of sharing the saddle. "Hold tight to the horn," he instructed. "Scout knows his way to town." As they rode through the thickening snowfall, Vincent found himself strangely aware of the woman sharing his saddle, not just her physical presence, but the courage it must have taken to journey alone to this remote town, to visit a grave in weather that would deter most men, to accept help from a stranger without surrendering her dignity. What Vincent didn't realize was that this encounter, this simple act of giving his last candle to a woman shivering in the churchyard, would alter the course of his carefully constructed solitary existence, challenging everything his uncle had taught him about surviving the frontier alone. The storm that had begun as gentle snowfall had developed into a proper blizzard by the time they reached Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. The modest two-story structure glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from its chimney in defiance of the howling wind. "Looks like you made it just in time," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed as they stomped snow from their boots in the entryway. She was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and practical hands that never seemed to stop moving. "Kate, dear, we were getting worried. And who's this young man?" "Mrs. Peterson, this is Vincent Faulkner," Kate said, her color returning as warmth enveloped them. "He kindly escorted me from the churchyard. I've invited him to join us for supper, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable," the older woman replied, giving Vincent an appraising look. "Any gentleman who'd brave this weather to help one of my boarders is welcome at my table. Though you'll need to stable your horse, this storm isn't letting up anytime soon." Vincent glanced toward the window, where snow was now piling against the glass. "I'd be obliged if you could point me to the nearest stable, ma'am." "2 doors down, Fletcher's livery, Mrs. Peterson directed. Tell Hank I sent you, he'll treat your horse right." Kate began removing Vincent's coat, but he shook his head. "Keep it until I return. Won't take but a few minutes to settle, Scout." As Vincent trudged back into the storm, leading Scout toward the livery, he felt oddly disoriented. Not from the blinding snow, but from the unexpected turn his day had taken. He'd come to town for a solitary ritual of remembrance, and now found himself invited to a communal dinner, all because he'd offered his candle to a shivering woman. Uncle Henry would have called him a fool. Getting involved with strangers only complicated life, especially a beautiful stranger with storm-gray eyes who traveled alone and spoke with such forthright confidence. Not getting involved, Vincent muttered to himself as he negotiated terms with the stable owner. Just being decent, there's a difference. When he returned to the boarding house, stomping snow from his boots once more, he found the main parlor transformed. A fire roared in the hearth, and several of the house's residents had gathered in the warm light, drawn downstairs by the promise of hot food and company to weather the storm. Kate sat near the fire, still wrapped in his coat despite the room's warmth, deep in conversation with an elderly man who gesticulated wildly as he spoke. She looked up when Vincent entered, her face brightening in a way that caused an unexpected tightness in his chest. "Vince," she called, gesturing him over. "Come meet Mr. Abernathy. He's been telling me the most fascinating stories about the early days of Sweetwater Creek." Before Vincent could fully process the casual way she'd used his name, as if they were old friends rather than recent acquaintances, Mrs. Peterson announced that supper was served, and the small gathering moved toward the dining room. Vincent found himself seated beside Kate at the long oak table, surrounded by the boarding house's eclectic residents, Mr. Abernathy, the elderly storyteller, a young schoolteacher named Miss Winters, a railroad surveyor called Hammond, and a quiet man introduced only as Jones, who wore the faded uniform pants of a former Confederate soldier. The stew was indeed excellent, rich with beef, potatoes, and carrots, and the fresh-baked bread served alongside it would have made the finest hotel in Helena jealous. But more surprising than the quality of the food was the easy conversation that flowed around the table. These were strangers sharing nothing but temporary shelter, yet they spoke with the comfortable familiarity of a family. They asked questions, listened to answers, laughed at stories, and expressed genuine interest in one another's lives. No one seemed concerned with establishing dominance or protecting themselves from potential threats, social behaviors Vincent had observed in nearly every gathering of frontier men he'd encountered. "So, Mr. Faulkner, Mrs. Peterson said as she refilled his bowl without asking, "What brings you to Sweetwater Creek, besides rescuing young ladies from blizzards, of course?" Vincent felt several pairs of eyes turned toward him with interest. "Just passing through, ma'am. Heading south for winter work." "A cowboy?" Mr. Abernathy asked, his bushy eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Yes, sir, since I was 14. "Started young then," the old man commented. Vincent nodded, uncomfortable with the attention yet strangely unwilling to shut down the conversation as he normally would. "My uncle raised me after my parents died. He was a drover, so I learned the trade early." "Your uncle," Kate said softly beside him. "The one whose grave you were visiting." Vincent glanced at her, surprised she'd made the connection. "Yes, Henry Faulkner, passed last spring pneumonia." "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, and the simple sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. Before he could respond, Hammond the surveyor launched into a story about a cattle drive he'd witnessed in Wyoming, and the conversation shifted away from Vincent's personal history, a relief that nonetheless left him with conflicting emotions. As supper progressed, Vincent found himself increasingly aware of Kate beside him. Not just her physical presence, though that was distracting enough, the faint scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite the day's trials, the graceful movement of her hands as she spoke, the way her walnut-colored hair caught the lamplight. More unsettling was his growing curiosity about her story. Why was she traveling alone to Denver? What had brought her to Sweetwater Creek to visit her father's grave? What had caused the profound grief he'd witnessed in the churchyard? These questions, this interest in another person's life and circumstances, were dangerous indulgences he typically avoided. Yet as the meal concluded and the residents moved back to the parlor for coffee, Vincent found himself following, drawn by something he couldn't name. In the parlor, Kate finally removed his coat, revealing her blue wool dress beneath. "Thank you for the loan," she said, handing it back with a smile. It was like being wrapped in a warm bear. Vincent accepted the coat with an awkward nod. Glad it helped, he should leave now. The storm was still raging, but the livery was just 2 doors down and he could sleep in the stable loft rather than impose further. "Will you have coffee?" Kate asked, gesturing toward Mrs. Peterson, who was distributing cups. "I should probably get back to my horse," Vincent said, though without much conviction. Kate's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. I understand, but—" She hesitated, then continued with determination. "I would very much like to repay your kindness properly, perhaps breakfast before I leave tomorrow. The stage doesn't depart until 9. Vincent found himself agreeing before he'd fully considered the implications. "That would be fine, Miss Calloway." "Kate," she reminded him again, her smile returning. "We've shared a horse and a dinner table. I think we can dispense with formalities." As Vincent made his way back to the livery through snow that now reached his calves, he wondered what Uncle Henry would say about his behavior today. Probably that he was being a fool, allowing himself to be distracted by a pretty face and warm company when he should be focused on his journey south. But as he settled into the hay of the stable loft, surprisingly comfortable with Scout's steady breathing below, Vincent couldn't bring himself to regret his decisions. For the first time in months, the hollow feeling in his chest had subsided, replaced by something warm and unfamiliar. Just one breakfast, he told himself as he drifted toward sleep, then back to the trail. No complications. But the frontier had taught Vincent one lesson above all others. Plans rarely survived contact with reality. And reality, in the form of Katherine Calloway, was already reshaping his carefully constructed solitude in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Morning arrived with brilliant clarity, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Sunlight sparkled across unblemished snow, transforming Sweetwater Creek into a pristine wonderland that concealed the town's usual dust and grit beneath a blanket of white. Vincent woke at dawn from habit, fed and watered Scout, then spent longer than usual attending to his appearance before heading to the boarding house. He told himself the extra care was simply respect for Mrs. Peterson's establishment, not for the woman he was meeting for breakfast. When he arrived, he found Kate already seated in the dining room, dressed for travel in a practical brown dress with a white collar, her walnut hair neatly braided and pinned beneath a modest hat. She looked up as he entered, and the smile that brightened her face caused that same strange tightness in his chest. "Good morning," she greeted him. "I hope you weren't too uncomfortable in the stable." "Slept like a king," Vincent replied, taking the seat across from her. "Hay's warmer than most bedrolls I've had." Mrs. Peterson soon appeared with plates heaped with fried potatoes, eggs, and thick slices of ham, along with coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. "Eat up," she instructed. "Both of you have traveling to do, and it won't do to start on empty stomachs." As they ate, Vincent found conversation coming easier than expected. Kate told him about her cousin's ranch outside Denver, where she would be staying indefinitely. "Martin married a widow with 3 children," she explained. "They've invited me to help with the household and the children's education. It's a generous offer considering." She trailed off, her eyes darkening briefly with what Vincent recognized as grief. "Considering your father's passing," he finished gently. Kate nodded, pushing a potato around her plate. "Yes, he was all I had left after Mother died 5 years ago. The house in Helena is sold now, the debt's paid. There's nothing left to keep me there." "I'm sorry," Vincent said, and meant it. He understood loss, the way it hollowed you out and set you adrift. "Thank you," she met his eyes directly. "That's why I understand what your candle meant. It wasn't just a candle, was it? It was connection. Remembrance." Her perception startled him. "Yes," he admitted. "Uncle Henry taught me that remembering keeps something of the dead alive." "Yet you gave it to me instead," she said softly. Vincent shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You needed it more than he did." Still, it was kind, kinder than many men would have been. She sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim. "Your uncle must have been a good man to raise someone with such instincts." "He was practical," Vincent corrected. "Taught me survival, not kindness." "Perhaps kindness is part of survival," Kate suggested. "At least out here, where we all depend on each other more than we admit." Before Vincent could formulate a response to this unsettling idea, Mrs. Peterson bustled in to announce that the stagecoach was preparing to depart. "Better hurry, dear," she told Kate. "Hiram Doyle waits for no one, not even pretty young ladies." Kate rose, gathering her small traveling bag. "Thank you for breakfast, Mrs. Peterson, for everything." The older woman enveloped her in a maternal hug. "You're welcome back any time, child. and when you write from Denver, include news of yourself alongside your cousin's family you hear. Vincent found himself standing as well, oddly reluctant for the meal to end. I'll walk you to the stage, he offered, reaching for his hat. Outside, the main street bustled with activity as the town dug itself out from the storm. Men shoveled paths between buildings, while shopkeepers cleared their boardwalks. The stagecoach stood ready at the far end, the driver securing luggage to its roof while 4 strong horses stomped impatiently. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the stage. Vincent wasn't sure what to say. This was a temporary crossing of paths, nothing more. Tomorrow he would ride south and Kate would be settled with her cousin's family in Denver. They would likely never cross paths again. Yet something made him hesitate as the driver called for passengers to board. "Well," Kate said, turning to face him, "thank you again, Vincent Faulkner, for the candle, the coat, the escort, all of it." "It was nothing," he said automatically. "No," she disagreed with surprising firmness. "It was something important." She seemed about to say more, then glanced at the impatient driver and stopped herself. "I should go." Vincent nodded, stepping back to allow her passage. This was the natural end of their brief acquaintance, a handshake, perhaps a tip of his hat, and then separate paths. But as Kate placed her foot on the stage step, she suddenly turned back. "Where will you go?" "After Texas, I mean." The question caught him off guard. "Haven't thought that far ahead, wherever there's work, I suppose." She seemed to consider this, then reached into her bag and withdrew a small notebook. Hastily, she tore out a page and wrote something before folding it and extending it toward him. "My cousin's address in Denver," she explained as he accepted the folded paper. "Should you find yourself in Colorado?" "Well, there's always work on a ranch." Before Vincent could process what this might mean, the driver called a final warning. Kate climbed aboard, and moments later the stage lurched into motion, wheels crunching through the snow as it pulled away from Sweetwater Creek. Vincent stood watching until the coach disappeared around a bend, the folded paper clutched in his gloved hand like an unexpected gift, or perhaps a challenge to everything he thought he knew about surviving the frontier. 2 months later, Vincent found himself in the dusty cattle town of Dodge City, Kansas, wondering why he'd veered east instead of continuing south as planned. The winter had been mild enough that work wasn't scarce, yet here he was, drifting without purpose like a tumbleweed caught in conflicting winds. He sat alone in a corner of the Long Branch saloon, nursing a whiskey and avoiding the raucous poker games and working girls who circulated among the tables. From his pocket he withdrew a folded piece of paper, now worn soft at the creases from frequent handling. Katherine Calloway's neat handwriting stared back at him, Willow Creek Ranch, Denver, Colorado Territory. Below the address she had added a postscript he had read countless times: "The West needn't be faced alone." Vincent refolded the paper and returned it to his pocket. Why had he kept it? What possible purpose could the address serve? He had no intention of traveling to Denver, no reason to seek out a woman he'd met only briefly during a snowstorm. Yet the encounter had lingered with him, disrupting the comfortable solitude he'd cultivated for years. He found himself remembering details: the way snowflakes had caught in her eyelashes, the determined set of her chin when she insisted on repaying his kindness, the surprising depth of understanding in her gray eyes when she'd spoken of his candle as connection. "You look like a man wrestling with ghosts," observed a gravelly voice. Vincent glanced up to find an older cowboy standing beside his table, hat in hand, a courtesy rarely observed in Dodge City saloons. "Mind if I join you?" the man asked. "Name's Sullivan, Thomas Sullivan." Vincent gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Vincent Faulkner." Sullivan settled his weathered frame into the chair with a grateful sigh. Close up, Vincent could see the man was older than he'd first appeared, perhaps in his 60s, with a face mapped by decades of sun and wind, and eyes that held both humor and hard-earned wisdom. "Passing through?" Sullivan asked, signaling for a drink. "For now," Vincent replied noncommittally. "Heading anywhere particular?" Vincent shrugged. "South, eventually." Sullivan studied him with unexpected perception. "You don't strike me as a man without direction, yet here you sit, looking like you've lost your compass." Under normal circumstances, Vincent would have shut down such personal observations with cold politeness. But something about Sullivan's matter-of-fact delivery disarmed his usual defenses. "Maybe I have," he admitted, "lost my compass." Sullivan nodded as if this confirmed a theory. "Happens to the best of us. Lost mine once, spent 3 years wandering before I found it again." "How'd you find it?" Vincent asked, surprising himself with his interest. "My wife," Sullivan answered simply, "or rather the woman who became my wife. Found her half dead in a creek bed after Comanche raiders hit her family's wagon, nursed her back to health, intending to drop her at the next settlement." He chuckled at the memory. 32 years later, she's still bossing me around." Vincent shifted uncomfortably. Not everyone's cut out for that life. "True enough," Sullivan agreed easily. "Some men are born to wander, but others," he leaned forward slightly. "Others wander because they're afraid to stop." The observation hit too close to home. Vincent drained his whiskey and stood abruptly. "Thanks for the company, Mr. Sullivan. I should turn in." Sullivan didn't seem offended by the sudden departure. "Heading out tomorrow." Vincent hesitated, "Most likely." "Which direction?" Again that inexplicable hesitation. "Haven't decided yet." Sullivan's eyes crinkled with knowing amusement. "Well, when you do decide, remember this. A man can't outrun his own nature forever. Sooner or later you have to face whatever's chasing you, even if it's just your own heart." With that cryptic advice, Sullivan tipped his hat and left Vincent standing by the table, unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with whiskey. That night, lying on his rented bed, Vincent found himself unable to sleep. Sullivan's words circled his thoughts like wolves around a campfire. Others wander because they're afraid to stop. Was that what he'd been doing since Uncle Henry died? Running from the emptiness of a life lived solely for survival, from the possibility that Henry had been wrong, that connection might be worth the risk of loss. Vincent pulled Kate's note from his pocket and studied it in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. Denver wasn't that far, a week's ride, maybe less if the weather held and he pushed Scout, but what would he say when he arrived? "Hello, I'm the stranger who gave you a candle in a graveyard." She'd probably forgotten him already, settled into her new life with her cousin's family, yet she had given him the address, had even suggested there might be work. It wasn't an invitation exactly, but it wasn't nothing. By dawn, Vincent had made his decision. He would ride to Denver, not with expectations or declarations, just to see if Willow Creek Ranch needed an experienced cowhand. If nothing came of it, he'd continue south as planned, no harm in checking. He told himself it was just a practical detour. But as he saddled Scout and pointed the gelding's nose westward, Vincent couldn't deny the lightness in his chest, almost like hope, a sensation so unfamiliar he barely recognized it. The journey to Denver took 6 days of steady riding. As mountains rose on the horizon, replacing the endless plains, Vincent found himself rehearsing what he would say to Kate when he arrived. Sometimes he imagined her pleased surprise, other times her polite confusion at the appearance of a man she barely remembered. On the 7th day, he reached the outskirts of Denver and asked directions to Willow Creek Ranch. The sprawling property lay 10 miles northwest of town, a respectable spread with good grazing land nestled against the foothills. As Vincent approached the ranch house, a solid 2-story structure built of local timber, doubt crashed over him with paralyzing force. What was he doing here? What did he expect to happen? This impulsive journey suddenly seemed like madness. He was about to turn Scout around when the front door opened and a small figure darted out, a boy of perhaps 8 years, pursued by a familiar voice calling, "Timothy Martin, you come back here this instant. Your mother will have my head if you go to dinner with those filthy hands." And then Kate appeared in the doorway, her walnut hair escaping from its pins just as it had that day in the churchyard. She wore a simple cotton dress the color of spring leaves, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, suggesting interrupted household tasks. She hadn't seen him yet, her attention focused on the rebellious boy racing toward the barn. Vincent remained frozen in his saddle, suddenly aware of how dusty and trail-worn he must appear. It was Scout who betrayed his presence, nickering softly at the sight of other horses in the corral. Kate's head turned toward the sound, her eyes widening as she recognized the rider sitting motionless on the road. For a terrible moment, Vincent thought he saw confusion in her expression. Then her face transformed with a smile so genuine it made his chest ache. "Vincent Faulkner," she called, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, "you're a long way from Sweetwater Creek." He urged Scout forward, stopping at a respectful distance from the porch. "Miss Calloway," he greeted, removing his hat. "I was passing through and remembered your cousin's ranch was nearby." It was a poor explanation for his presence, and Kate's raised eyebrow suggested she knew it. "Passing through on your way to where, exactly?" Vincent found himself without a ready answer. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" On whether there might be work here, he gestured toward the ranch's sprawling acreage. I'm handy with cattle and horses, can mend fences, repair roofs, break colts if needed. Kate studied him with those perceptive gray eyes, and Vincent had the uncomfortable sensation she could see straight through his practical pretense to the truth beneath. He had ridden hundreds of miles just to see her again. Before she could respond, the front door opened again, and a tall man with a friendly face stepped onto the porch. Kate. Who's our visitor? Martin, this is Vincent Faulkner, Kate said, turning toward her cousin, the cowboy from Montana I mentioned. The fact that she had spoken of him sent an unexpected warmth through Vincent's chest. The one with the candle? Martin asked, stepping forward with an extended hand. Welcome to Willow Creek, Mr. Faulkner. Any man who shows such kindness to my cousin is welcome here. Vincent dismounted and shook the offered hand, noting the strength in the rancher's grip. Thank you, sir. I was just asking Miss Calloway if you might have need of an extra hand. Martin's face brightened. As a matter of fact, we do. Lost 2 men last month to gold fever, headed up to the mountains convinced they'd make their fortune. You have experience with cattle. Since I could walk, sir. Then you've come at a perfect time. Spring calving starts next week, and we're short-handed. He glanced at Kate with a smile that suggested he understood more than he was letting on. I'm sure Kate can show you to the bunkhouse and explain how things run around here. With that, Martin excused himself to finish some paperwork, leaving Vincent and Kate standing in the yard, a curious tension humming between them. You mentioned me to your cousin? Vincent asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Kate's cheeks colored slightly. You made quite an impression. It's not every day a stranger offers his coat and last candle to a woman in distress. She hesitated, then added quietly, I didn't expect to see you again. I didn't expect to come, Vincent admitted, but I kept thinking about what you wrote, about the West not needing to be faced alone. Kate's expression softened, and what do you think now? After facing it alone these past months. Vincent looked around at the ranch, at the life being built here, the community of family and workers evident in every well-maintained building and carefully tended field. So different from the solitary existence he'd known. I think I'd like to try something different, he said finally, if that's still possible. It's always possible, Kate replied with quiet confidence. Come, I'll show you where you'll be staying, and then perhaps you can join us for dinner. Martha, that's Martin's wife, always cooks enough to feed an army. As Vincent followed Kate toward the bunkhouse, leading Scout behind them, he felt something shift inside him, a softening of the hard shell he'd built around himself since Uncle Henry's death. Perhaps even longer. He didn't know what might develop between himself and Katherine Calloway. Friendship certainly, perhaps something more if time and circumstance allowed. But for the first time in years, Vincent was open to the possibility that survival alone wasn't enough, that connection, however risky, might be worth the potential pain. The frontier had taught him that danger lurked around every corner. But perhaps it had more to teach him yet, about courage of a different kind, about the strength found not in isolation, but in reaching toward another human soul. Spring calving season at Willow Creek Ranch proved to be exactly the demanding work Vincent needed to settle into his new surroundings. Days blurred into weeks of little sleep, constant vigilance, and the particular satisfaction that came from helping new life enter the world. Martin Calloway proved to be a fair employer with a keen understanding of cattle and men alike. His wife Martha, a practical woman with a warm heart, ran the household with calm efficiency while caring for her 3 children from a previous marriage. Timothy, the 8-year-old Vincent had seen that first day. Elizabeth, a serious 12-year-old, and Sarah, a shy girl of 10. And then there was Kate, whose role in the household defied simple definition. She helped Martha with domestic duties but also kept the ranch's books, taught the children their lessons, and occasionally joined the men for cattle work when extra hands were needed. During those first weeks, Vincent saw Kate primarily at mealtimes, when the ranch hands were invited to the main house for Martha's cooking. Their interactions were friendly but cautious, both seemingly aware of the curious glances from the other hands and the children's unsubtle interest in the new cowboy who had traveled so far just passing through. As April mellowed into May and the most intense work of calving season eased, Vincent found more opportunities for conversation with Kate. Sometimes they would meet by chance at the corral fence, watching the new foals test their spindly legs. Other times, he would offer to help carry supplies from town, using the journey for uninterrupted discussion. During these conversations, Vincent learned the full story of Kate's journey to Sweetwater Creek. Her father, a respected doctor in Helena, had died suddenly of a heart condition, leaving substantial debts that forced the sale of their home and most possessions. The journey to her father's grave had been a final goodbye before starting her new life in Colorado. He would have hated seeing me dependent on relatives, Kate confided one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. He raised me to be self-sufficient after Mother died. You seem plenty self-sufficient to me, Vincent observed. Martin mentioned you could have had your pick of teaching positions in Denver. Kate smiled, tucking a strand of walnut hair behind her ear. I could have, but teaching 30 children in a stuffy schoolroom didn't appeal nearly as much as helping raise my cousin's family on a working ranch. She glanced at him curiously. What about you? Surely there were safer, easier professions than cowboying. Vincent considered this, never gave it much thought. Uncle Henry was a cowhand, so I became one too. He always said a man needed to be able to move on at a moment's notice. Can't do that with a shop or a farm. And is that still important to you, being able to move on? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Vincent found himself considering it more seriously than he might have just months ago. Used to think so, he answered slowly. Now I'm not so sure. Kate nodded, seeming to understand all he wasn't saying. People can be worth staying for, Vincent, worth the risk of loss. Before he could respond to this gentle challenge to everything Uncle Henry had taught him, Martha called them in for dessert, and the moment passed, though its effect lingered in Vincent's thoughts for days afterward. As spring ripened toward summer, Vincent found himself increasingly drawn into the rhythms of Willow Creek Ranch, not just its work, but its sense of community. Sunday dinners became a tradition he looked forward to, especially when Kate would play the piano afterward while the family sang hymns or popular songs. He discovered unexpected pleasure in teaching Timothy to ride and helping Elizabeth understand the mathematics that confounded her. Even shy Sarah eventually warmed to him, sharing her collection of unusual rocks and explaining their supposed magical properties with solemn importance. Yet despite his growing attachment to the place and its people, Vincent maintained a careful distance from Kate. They were friends, certainly, perhaps even close friends. But he kept a guard around his heart, unwilling to risk the comfortable life he'd found by pushing for something more. Kate, for her part, seemed content with their developing friendship, never pressing for declarations or commitments. But sometimes Vincent would catch her watching him with those perceptive gray eyes, as if waiting for him to recognize something important that remained just beyond his grasp. The catalyst for change came in early July, when a telegram arrived announcing the imminent visit of Martha's brother Edward and his wife from San Francisco. Their 2-week stay would coincide with Denver's Independence Day celebrations and the county fair that followed. We'll need to rearrange the sleeping arrangements, Martha announced at dinner the evening after the telegram arrived. Edward and Caroline will take the guest room, which means Kate will need to share with the girls. Kate accepted this news with good grace, though Vincent noticed her momentary expression of dismay at the prospect of sharing a small room with 3 active children during the heat of summer. Actually, Martin interjected, I've been meaning to discuss another option. The old line cabin by Willow Creek, the one my father built when he first claimed the land. It needs work, but with some attention, it could make a fine private residence for Kate. Martha brightened at the suggestion. What a wonderful idea. Kate deserves her own space, especially with all she does for us. The roof needs replacing, Martin continued, and the chimney wants repair. Probably take a couple of strong backs a week or so to make it properly habitable. I could help, Vincent found himself offering, between regular duties, of course. All eyes turned to him, and he felt his neck warm under the collective gaze. That's very kind, Vincent, Kate said, her eyes reflecting something that might have been hope. But surely you have better uses for your free time. None I can think of, he replied honestly. And so began a new chapter in their relationship, working side by side to transform the abandoned line cabin into a comfortable dwelling. Each evening after regular ranch work concluded, Vincent would ride out to the cabin where Kate would already be cleaning or planning the next day's tasks. The small structure sat in a grove of cottonwoods beside the creek that gave the ranch its name, far enough from the main house to offer privacy but close enough for convenience. Built of solid logs with a stone fireplace, it had weathered its years of neglect remarkably well, needing more cleaning than structural repair. As they worked together, Vincent on the roof and chimney, Kate on the interior, their conversations deepened beyond the careful exchanges of the previous months. Physical labor and shared purpose broke down barriers that politeness had maintained. "My father would approve of this," Kate remarked one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch steps, watching fireflies rise from the creek bed. "Creating something with my own hands, making my own space in the world." "He sounds like a wise man," Vincent said. "Would he have approved of you staying here rather than taking a teaching position?" Kate considered this, absently brushing sawdust from her skirts. "I think so. He believed in following your heart, not just practical considerations." She glanced at Vincent. "What about your uncle? Would he approve of you settling in one place for so long?" Vincent knew the answer immediately. No. He'd say I was being foolish. Putting down roots just means more pain when you inevitably have to pull them up. "And do you still believe that?" Kate asked quietly. The question hung between them in the gathering dusk. Vincent stared out at the darkening landscape, at the mountains etched against the fading light, at the ranch that had begun to feel like home in ways he'd never experienced before. "I'm starting to think Uncle Henry might have been wrong about some things," he admitted finally. "He lost so much in his life, his wife, his child, his brother and sister-in-law, my parents. Maybe avoiding attachment seemed like the only way to survive." "But it's not really living, is it?" Kate observed gently, "just surviving." Vincent met her gaze directly. "No. It's not really living." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that snowy day in the churchyard. Neither moved to act on it, but both recognized the change, like the first subtle warming of winter into spring. The cabin was completed just days before Edward and Caroline's arrival. It was a simple dwelling but charming in its rustic way, with chintz curtains Martha had sewn, a colorful rag rug Kate had made herself, and furniture contributed from various corners of the ranch. The morning Kate officially moved in, Vincent helped transport her few possessions from the main house. As they arranged the last items, books on shelves, a small clock on the mantel, Kate turned to him with an expression of such genuine happiness that Vincent felt his carefully constructed barriers weaken further. "I can't thank you enough," she said, "not just for the work but for understanding why this matters." "Independence," Vincent nodded, "your own place in the world." "Yes, exactly." She looked around the cabin with evident satisfaction. "Though independence doesn't have to mean isolation, I hope you'll visit sometimes, when your duties allow." The invitation, simple as it was, represented a crossing of boundaries they had both respected until now. Ranch hands didn't typically pay social calls on unmarried women, even those connected to the owner's family. Such visits carried implications that frontier society recognized all too well. Vincent understood this, as did Kate. Yet she had offered, and he found himself unable to refuse. "I'd like that," he said simply. The arrival of Martha's relatives brought a festive atmosphere to Willow Creek Ranch. Edward and Caroline Patterson proved to be amiable guests, clearly wealthy from Edward's shipping business, but without the condescension such success often bred. They brought exotic gifts for the children and stories of San Francisco society that entertained the adults during evening gatherings. On July 4th, the entire household traveled into Denver for the celebrations. The city had organized an impressive parade, complete with cavalry units, marching bands, and elaborate floats. Afterward came a community picnic in the town square, where tables groaned with contributed dishes and a platform had been erected for dancing. As dusk approached and musicians began tuning their instruments for the dance, Vincent found himself standing awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. He had changed from ranch clothes into his best shirt and pants, even purchased a new neckerchief for the occasion, but still felt out of place among the townspeople in their holiday finery. He was considering a quiet retreat when Kate appeared beside him, looking more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. She wore a dress of deep blue cotton, not elaborate by town standards, but perfectly suited to her natural elegance. Her walnut hair was arranged in a simple style that framed her face, and she wore a silver pendant that caught the last rays of sunlight. "You're not planning to leave without dancing, are you?" she asked, her gray eyes sparkling with mischief. Vincent shifted uncomfortably. "Not much for dancing, I'm afraid." "Neither am I," she admitted, "but it's Independence Day and the music is playing, and for once we're not covered in dust or paint or cow manure." She held out her hand. "Just one dance, Vincent Faulkner, for the holiday." How could he refuse? Vincent took her offered hand and led her toward the dance floor, where couples were already forming lines for a Virginia reel. He had danced occasionally in cattle towns after drives, but those rough affairs bore little resemblance to this more formal setting. Kate sensed his nervousness and squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Just follow my lead," she whispered. "No one will notice if we make mistakes." But as the music began and they moved through the patterns of the dance, Vincent discovered unexpected pleasure in the ordered movements, in the brief moments when the figures brought him and Kate together before separating them again. There was something almost magical in the way the entire community moved in harmony, strangers and friends alike united by music and tradition. When the reel ended, a slower waltz began. Vincent hesitated, but Kate retained her hold on his hand. "One more?" she asked, and he nodded, unable to deny her anything in that moment. The waltz brought them closer, his hand resting lightly at her waist, hers on his shoulder, their other hands clasped together. As they moved in careful circles, Vincent became acutely aware of her nearness. The lavender scent that had first caught his attention in Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, the warmth of her hand in his, the trust implied by her willingness to follow his lead despite his limited experience. "You're doing wonderfully," Kate murmured, looking up at him with an expression that made his heart stutter in his chest. "I have a good partner," he replied. As the music continued, Vincent found himself overcome by the realization of how deeply Katherine Calloway had worked her way into his life. In less than 3 months, she had transformed from a stranger in a churchyard to the center of his thoughts, the focus of hopes he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge until this moment. Uncle Henry would have called it weakness. But Vincent, moving across the dance floor with Kate in his arms, finally recognized it for what it was: strength, the courage to care, to risk loss for the possibility of something greater than mere survival. The music ended, but Vincent didn't immediately release her. Instead, he gathered his newfound courage and asked quietly, "Would you walk with me, just for a few minutes?" Kate nodded, and they slipped away from the crowded dance floor toward the quieter edges of the square. The first stars were appearing overhead, and lanterns hung from trees cast pools of gentle light across their path. "I've been thinking," Vincent began when they reached a relatively private spot near a stand of cottonwoods, "about what you said at the cabin, about independence not meaning isolation." "Yes," Kate encouraged when he paused. Vincent took a deep breath. "My uncle taught me that a man needs to rely only on himself. That connections lead to pain because people always leave, one way or another." He met her eyes directly. "But since coming to Willow Creek, I've started to wonder if he had it backward. If maybe the connections are what make the pain bearable when it comes. If they're what make life worth living, regardless of how long it lasts." Kate's eyes softened with understanding. "I think they are. I know my time with my parents was too short, but I wouldn't trade those years of love for a lifetime without pain." "I'm starting to understand that," Vincent admitted, "and I need to tell you something, Kate. I didn't come to Denver by chance. I came because I couldn't forget you. Because that day in the churchyard changed something in me, and I needed to know if there could be more." Kate's face brightened with a smile that rivaled the fireworks now beginning to explode overhead. "I've been waiting for you to realize that," she said softly, "ever since you rode up to the ranch that day." "I'm a slow learner," Vincent acknowledged with a rueful smile. "But I'm hoping I haven't waited too long to ask if you might consider, if we might explore what's growing between us." In answer, Kate reached up and placed her palm against his cheek, her touch gentle yet certain. "Vincent Faulkner, I've been exploring it since the moment you gave me your last candle. I was just waiting for you to catch up." Vincent covered her hand with his own, then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful of their public setting yet unmistakable in its meaning, a promise, a beginning, a declaration that couldn't be put into words. When they separated, the world around them seemed transformed, not by the fireworks or music or celebration, but by the simple recognition of what had been building between them since that snowy day in Sweetwater Creek. "Does this mean you'll stay?" Kate asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "At Willow Creek, I mean." Vincent knew his answer with absolute certainty. "As long as you're here, I can't imagine being anywhere else." Their return to the main celebration was marked by subtle changes, fingers loosely intertwined, shoulders occasionally brushing, exchanged glances that carried new meaning. If others noticed, they were kind enough not to comment, though Vincent caught Martha hiding a smile behind her hand when Kate leaned close to whisper something in his ear. The next morning, Vincent rose earlier than necessary and rode to Martin's office in the main house. The rancher was already at his desk, reviewing the previous day's correspondence. "Faulkner," Martin greeted him. "What brings you here so early? Problem with the North herd?" "No, sir," Vincent replied, removing his hat and holding it respectfully before him. "I wanted to speak with you about a personal matter." Martin set down his papers, giving Vincent his full attention. "Regarding my cousin, I assume." Vincent nodded, suddenly nervous despite the previous evening's developments. "Yes, sir. I wanted to ask your permission to court Katherine properly, with honorable intentions." A slow smile spread across Martin's face. "I've been expecting this conversation since the day you rode onto my property, Faulkner." He leaned back in his chair. "Kate is her own woman, has been since long before she came to live with us. She doesn't need my permission to choose her companions." "I understand, sir, but I was raised to respect certain traditions and as her closest male relative." Martin held up a hand to stop him. "I appreciate the gesture, Vincent. Truly, and yes, you have my blessing to court Kate for whatever that's worth, but what matters more is that you have her trust. I've watched how she looks at you, how she's blossomed since your arrival." His expression grew more serious. "Don't betray that trust." "I won't, sir," Vincent promised, relief and gratitude washing through him. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Martin called after him, "One more thing, Faulkner. That old Watson property adjoining our east pasture, you know it." Vincent nodded. He'd ridden past the abandoned homestead several times during boundary checks. "I've been thinking of acquiring it," Martin continued. "Good grazing land, decent water access. Might need someone to manage it as part of our operation, someone who knows cattle and has a stake in seeing the ranch succeed." His meaningful look made the implication clear. "Something to consider for the future." The offer, for that's what it was, however indirectly stated, stunned Vincent. "Thank you, sir. I'll certainly give it thought." As summer progressed into autumn, Vincent and Kate's courtship became a source of gentle amusement and approval throughout the ranch. Their routine developed naturally. Work during the day, evenings often spent at Kate's cabin sharing meals, reading aloud, or simply talking as the creek burbled its endless song outside. Vincent discovered depths to Kate he hadn't fully appreciated before, her quick mind that devoured books of history and science as readily as poetry, her quiet strength that had carried her through multiple losses without bitterness, her capacity for joy in simple pleasures like wildflowers or morning birdsong. In turn, Kate drew out aspects of Vincent's character that had long remained buried beneath the hard necessities of frontier survival. His dry humor emerged more frequently, along with a talent for storytelling that delighted not only Kate but the children, who began seeking him out for tales of his travels. By October, when the aspens turned golden on the mountainsides and cattle were moved to lower pastures for the coming winter, Vincent had made his decision about Martin's offer. The Watson property would indeed make an excellent addition to Willow Creek Ranch, and the prospect of managing it, of putting down permanent roots, no longer filled him with the restless anxiety that had driven his previous life. But there was another decision weighing on his mind, one far more important than land or cattle. On a crisp Sunday afternoon, he rode into Denver alone, returning to the ranch only after darkness had fallen. When Kate questioned his absence, he offered only a mysterious smile and a promise that all would be clear soon enough. The following Saturday, Vincent asked Kate to ride with him to the high meadow overlooking the ranch. They packed a simple picnic and set out mid-morning under a cloudless October sky, the air carrying that peculiar sharpness that heralds winter's approach. The meadow offered a spectacular view. Willow Creek Ranch spread below them like a patchwork quilt, the main house and outbuildings clearly visible, while the mountains formed a majestic backdrop to the west. Vincent spread a blanket beneath a solitary pine tree, and they enjoyed their meal amid comfortable conversation about ranch matters and the upcoming harvest festival in Denver. As they finished the apple pie Martha had contributed to their picnic, Vincent grew quieter, his expression turning thoughtful. "What is it?" Kate asked, reaching over to touch his hand. "You've been distracted all morning." Vincent took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what your father would want for you, about independence and making your own way in the world." Kate's expression softened. "He would want me to be happy above all else." "And are you happy at Willow Creek?" "You know I am," she replied without hesitation, "more than I ever expected to be after losing him." Vincent nodded, his nervousness evident despite his attempt at calm. "When I gave you that candle in the churchyard, I never imagined where it would lead, how completely my life would change because of one small act of kindness. Not small to me, Kate said softly. It meant everything that day. I've been trying to find the right words, Vincent continued. I'm not educated like your father was. I can't offer you the kind of life you might have had if things had been different. But I can promise you this, I will work every day to be worthy of your trust, to build something lasting with you. From his pocket, Vincent withdrew a small velvet box, the reason for his mysterious trip to Denver. Opening it, he revealed a ring of modest but unmistakable beauty, a single pearl nestled in a setting of delicate silver. Katherine Calloway, he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Kate's eyes filled with tears that caught the autumn sunlight. For a moment she seemed unable to speak, her hand pressed to her mouth in surprise or emotion, perhaps both. I know it's not grand, Vincent said hurriedly, misinterpreting her silence. The jeweler had finer pieces, but this one reminded me of you, simple but perfect. Kate shook her head, finding her voice at last. It's beautiful, Vincent, exactly what I would have chosen. She reached for his face, cradling it between her palms. And yes, I will marry you, not because you can offer me security or status, but because you see me clearly and love me anyway. Because you gave a shivering woman your last candle without expectation of return. Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into an embrace that conveyed everything words could not: gratitude, devotion, the promise of a shared future. As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, the setting sun gilding the landscape in amber light, Vincent marveled at how completely his understanding of survival had transformed. Uncle Henry had taught him to endure the frontier alone, to avoid attachment as weakness, to expect only hardship and loss. Yet here he was, happier than he'd ever been, precisely because he had opened himself to connection, to love. To the possibility that life could be more than mere survival, that it could be rich with meaning even in the face of inevitable loss. Kate and Vincent were married on Christmas Eve in the same small church where they had first met, having traveled back to Sweetwater Creek for the ceremony. Mrs. Peterson hosted the wedding supper in her boarding house dining room, transformed for the occasion with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. The following spring, they moved into the renovated Watson homestead, now officially part of Willow Creek Ranch, but operated semi-independently under Vincent's management. The modest house grew along with their family, first with the addition of a daughter they named Rose, then twin boys who arrived 2 years later. On each anniversary of their first meeting, Vincent would present Kate with a single beeswax candle, a tradition that their children eventually accepted as one of their parents' many inexplicable customs, like their father's habit of checking the horizon before entering a building or their mother's practice of reading, allowed by firelight even when lamps were readily available. Years passed, bringing both joys and sorrows as all years do. The settlement around Denver grew into a proper city. The children grew into adults with dreams of their own. Vincent's hair gradually silvered at the temples, while laugh lines deepened around Kate's eyes. Through it all, they faced the frontier together, not as adversaries of a harsh land, but as partners who had discovered that love, far from being a weakness in the challenging West, was in fact the greatest strength of all. On their 30th anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the same mountains that had witnessed their beginning, Kate asked the question that had lingered unspoken for decades. Do you ever regret it? Staying in one place all these years, defying your uncle's teachings. Vincent considered this as he held her hand, the pearl ring still gracing her finger alongside the gold band he'd added on their wedding day. Not for a single moment, he answered truthfully. Uncle Henry was wrong about what it takes to survive the frontier. It's not isolation that keeps a person strong, it's having something worth fighting for. Someone worth coming home to. Kate leaned against his shoulder, their bodies fitting together with the comfortable familiarity of 3 decades shared. That woman in the churchyard, she was so cold, so alone. She never imagined that a simple candle would light the way to everything. Neither did the cowboy who gave it, Vincent admitted, but he's grateful every day that it did. As darkness settled over the land they had tamed together, Vincent Faulkner reflected that the true lesson of the frontier was not how to survive alone, but how to recognize when survival wasn't enough anymore, when the time had come to risk everything for the chance to truly live.